Waldameer Park. Home to thousands of thrill seekers each summer. But how did it get here? Let's find out. Tonight on Project Algerine. Waldameer Park, the 10th oldest amusement park in the country. Located on the shoreline of Erie, Pennsylvania. Thousands of people have been coming to this spot for over 125 years. But Waldameer didn't set out to be the amusement park it is today. The park had a much more humble beginning. In 1889, the Erie Electric Motor Company was formed. To increase the number of paying passengers, especially on the weekends, the park purchased 65 acres of land in 1896, just west of the Massasauga Resort and Hotel, owned by the wealthy railroad industrialist William L. Scott. That area of land that the trolley company purchased was a well-known picnic destination known as Hoffman's Grove, named after the numerous chestnut trees scattered throughout the area. Ironically, getting trolley service to a trolley park by a trolley company seemed a bit more difficult. It took several years to resolve lawsuits brought by the then estate of William L. Scott, who didn't want any new competition for his own resort, which was just across what would later become Peninsula Drive. The Scott estate lost in the state Supreme Court, and the trolley company was permitted to lay its tracks down West 8th Street to what would now be known as Waldameer Park. Paying passengers could now take the 30-minute trolley directly to the park's entrance. In the early days, Waldameer's business was the beach. Once you got to the park, you would walk down long pathway to reach a boardwalk-covered lagoon. Later, the Tunaville trolley was constructed to make the journey a bit easier. Swimsuits were available to rent by the hour, in the bathhouse. Many people came to just enjoy the beach, even if they had no intention of swimming. The chance to get away from the city, if only for a few hours, was quite appealing to a lot of people. Waldameer's beach was fastly gaining popularity with the citizens of Erie. The first ride at Waldameer was actually on the beach. It was called the Whirly Gig. Developed by Bill Mangles of Coney Island. And yet, this was just the beginning. The upper area of the park, away from the beach, served up attractions such as the dance hall built in 1902, attractive groves for afternoon picnics, and a clamshell theater with live performers. Concessionaires would rent space from the trolley company each season, to sell refreshments to the guests. Games of chance, and a penny arcade were erected. The Midway was beginning to take shape. The oldest surviving building is the Carousel Building. Constructed way back in 1905, this building still houses Waldameer's merry-go-round to this day. This ride actually increased in value, fetching over $1 million at auction in 1988, enough to purchase a new carousel and pay for a much-needed expansion. One of the first true rides at Waldameer would undoubtedly be the aerial swings. Guests would sit in gondolas suspended from wires, while the ride would spin in a circle. The gondolas were replaced by planes, and then again at a later date by rocket ships. Whatever the flavor of the decade required. This ride lasted over 70 years at Waldameer, and was finally retired in 1973. It was replaced by the paratrooper. The park's attendance was growing each year. It became the place to be seen for dancing, dining, and socializing. Waldameer was becoming so popular that people would spend their entire summers here. This area, down near the beach, was known as Camp Clemens. After everyone went home, at the end of each season, the trolley cars would be stored here for the winter. But an unexpected change was soon coming. Around 1913, the Erie Electric Motor Company sold its trolley business and became the Buffalo and Lake Erie Traction Company. This new company had no intentions of keeping the park, and the property was eventually turned over to Marine Bank. German-born Alex Moeller arrived in Erie at 26 years old, and became the first maitre d' at the Lawrence Hotel, before a friend and concessionaire named George suggested Waldameer. At Waldameer, Moeller rose through the ranks quickly, and eventually convinced Marine Bank to lease the entire park to him to manage. With the park's two original roller coasters, Dip the Dips, and the Coney Island Scenic Railway, already showing their age, and riders wanting more thrills, Moeller sets out to expand the park. But it doesn't come without its challenges. The first was in November of 1924, when the original dance hall burned down. This upset many people, and Moeller vowed to rebuild it. Later that spring, construction started on its replacement. And on Monday, May 18, 1925, Rainbow Gardens opens with great fanfare. The structure is massive, and has hosted everything from dancing with live orchestras, to high school graduations, and even offered roller skating for a brief time. In the early morning hours of April 26, 1938, Rainbow Gardens once again catches fire. Moeller quickly announces plans to rebuild. Fire investigators find the safe had been opened, and the previous evening's earnings had gone missing. For the rest of that season, Rainbow Gardens functioned with no roof, as an open-air dance hall. By 1940, the necessary repairs had been made to the building, and Rainbow Gardens was back in business, and is still hosting events today. Waldameer was growing up, and Moeller was now recruiting talented management to handle certain aspects of the park. This provided time for more park development, and Moeller thought the park could use a new thrill ride. He brought in the best-known roller coaster designer in the country, named John Miller. Miller was considered the Thomas Edison of roller coasters, having designed over 150 coasters and patented over 100 key components in his lifetime. Before arriving in Erie in 1922, Miller's company had just finished a coaster called the Gorge Ride at Cascade Park in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And something similar to the Gorge Ride was just what Alex Moeller had in mind. Miller set to work immediately. The site was cleared out, and the Ravine Flyer opened later that year. Much like the Ravine Flyer 2, the original coaster transversed Peninsula Drive, turn around, and once again return across the roadway. An engineering marvel in that day. The coaster was a huge hit, and ran for 16 years before a tragic accident resulted in the death of a ridegoer in 1938. The ride was soon dismantled afterwards. Its replacement would not arrive for another 70 years. Ironically, John Miller would later die while working on a coaster in Houston, Texas in 1941. The original Ravine Flyer station still exists. It was converted into a picnic shelter, and sits tucked behind the current Ravine Flyer 2 station today. The The Ravine Flyer roller coaster wasn't the only impression John Miller left on Waldameer that season of 1922. A popular ride known as the Mill Chute was also constructed that year. The Mill Chute, named after John Miller, would take riders on boats through a concrete canal. A large hill at the end would offer a big splashdown, soaking the riders. The hill was made much lower in 1945, for obvious safety reasons. The mill run was retired in 1996, and replaced by a new waterlogged flume ride known as Thunder River. There is no doubt that both of those rides, the Ravine Flyer and the Mill Run, helped cement Waldameer's future as an amusement park. But hard times still lay ahead for Mola and his crew. Down on the beach, things were really progressing. Summer cottages sprang up around the hotel and shoreline. But problems were just around the corner. Several storms in the 1930s and 40s damaged the beach, finally washing the entire beach out through the lagoon and into the bay. The Army Corps of Engineers were called in to stop the erosion, and a breakwall was constructed. This ended Waldameer's beach, and it is no longer accessible to the public. This is what Waldameer's beach looks like today. Looking around in the 1940s, you can see the influence of George Sinclair throughout the park. George Sinclair was Mola's old colleague in the concessionaire business. George helped Mola construct many of the park's early rides. Alex and George were friends for many years. But what many people didn't know was that there was an almost identical twin amusement park to Waldameer, being constructed just 150 miles away. Myers Lake Park, just outside of Canton, Ohio, was owned by George Sinclair's family and had many of the same rides, even so much as to sharing the same names, such as the Mill Chutes, aerial swings, Fun in the Dark, and even their very own Comet roller coaster. Myers Lake Park closed in 1974, and is now a housing development. In 1950, Waldameer began construction on the Comet, an all-wooden roller coaster designed by Herbert Schmeck, and built by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company. The Comet has a figure-8 shape, with an oval layout. The ride begins with a right turn out of the station onto a 37-foot lift hill. It then drops 25 feet and sends riders more than 25 miles per hour. This still popular coaster was upgraded in 2012 with a magnetic braking system. You've been watching Waldameer Park on Project Algerine.